All right, welcome to the second episode of the 10 Tabs Open podcast. This is your host, Alex Howell, and today we have on a very good friend of mine, Brian Watts from Infinitas, which is a wealth management company in Overland Park, Kansas. Brian's going to talk to us a lot about not only markets in general, but he's going to talk about his business and how he was able to start, some of the struggles that he went through, some of the things that he learned along the way, and then what led him to the success that he's had. So I hope you all enjoy. Thank you. All right, we're live. All right, we have Brian Watts from Infinitas Coordinated Wealth Counsel, which we'll have a fun story about later. Brian's a good friend of mine. We'll say we grew up in the industry and had kind of a business together for a bit, but he has since taken off and done a great job. So have him on board. Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So like I was saying earlier, it's just loose. We can laugh. We can joke.
Okay.
I was going to say you could come on for drinks, but you chose coffee. And then chose to not have any coffee whatsoever. Fantastic.
I'm an interesting individual in the sense that I have coffee with people a lot as a first meeting. However, I don't drink coffee. I don't drink caffeine at all. So I am the person that has coffee with people often that doesn't actually partake in what the event is.
So you're like the girlfriend or boyfriend that you meet that isn't crazy in your first conversation and just continues on.
That's a good description.
So what's the new line in Infinitas? Can you just give everybody kind of a descriptor of what you guys do, because I know you have a ton of people that work in your place. I'm sure you guys don't just all share one client.
Not today. No. Yes, I'll give you a little history. I'm going to go back a little further than that as well. So I joined a number of years back a firm that was known as Summit Wealth Advisors, and it was myself, another advisor, and we had a number of staff people to help us out as well, a number of team members. It's been just over 2 years ago. So it was 2 years ago, January 1. We merged with a few other offices that are affiliated with the same broker-dealer and formed Infinitas, which, as we discussed, is we are known only as Infinitas. The Coordinated Wealth Counsel is a descriptor of what we do. And it gave us a good opportunity to serve people in spaces that we're not experts. I tend to work more in private wealth management. So I work with individuals helping them plan for their financial future, but I don't really do a whole lot in the area of company retirement plans, things like that. That was all being sent to another firm, and that firm has since joined us. They are experts in that area, really well renowned in the area of retirement plans, and that's a whole nother animal in itself. I mean, you spent some time in the industry.
Yeah.
The Department of Labor likes to change their rules often enough that it's not necessarily easy to keep up with. So it's comforting to know that we have a place to send that business so that people are served, because we get asked that a lot.
Well, it's got to be nice that they're down the hall too. It's not like you're
that part is great. We have an advisor that's also an estate attorney, so we have that offering in-house as well, which is nice for, once again, being down the hall.
Right.
If something comes up and there's a need right then and there, you don't need to make a separate appointment. We have an area that specializes in special needs trusts, and that has become a increasing need that we've seen over the years, where you have parents that have a child with special needs that they would like to pass that money on to, and there's an awful lot that can get in the way. So making sure that they're served. And we have an area that specializes in corporate executives, attorneys. There's just a lot of niche.
Yeah.
There are 15 advisors total. I think we manage like $2 billion, I believe. It changes obviously with every day in the market. And we've grown an office from 7 people to, I believe there are 42 of us now.
Oh wow.
In just a
I was there 2 years ago, and you guys weren't near that big.
No. Well, we've definitely service is incredibly important to us, so we need to have enough people on board to be able to make sure that happens.
Yeah. Well, it's nice because
when we were growing up in the industry, not to speak ill of where we were or anything like that, but being rookies the way that we were was like you're encouraged to go out and find as many assets as you can, wherever you can, however you can. Or I shouldn't say however you can, but as many as you can quickly. And it's nice when you have an office like yours where you actually have the ability to have people that are in niches, and you don't just have to be the expert in everything, but your office is the expert in finance.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that, because I think that is a big misconception for people that enter the industry, and we can definitely talk about this if you want.
Yeah, we'll go back.
But there's absolutely an idea at the beginning of I'll speak to anyone that is willing, and that can grow into a business that's incredibly unmanageable. So I feel like you can truly serve people well when you're at a point where you can be selective with what you will do, and it doesn't hurt your bottom line, essentially.
Right.
I feel like you can give your full attention to the people that you serve, and you really truly know what your capacity is when you can set some parameters for yourself and say, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I've even taken a bigger leap than that, and I've said, this is exactly what I want. I really don't want anything else.
Right, and I think that's a big, and you hear older advisors talk about this, or I should say more seasoned advisors, people who've been in the industry longer, where the day that you know that you're a good advisor is when you can turn somebody down. That doesn't always mean that you don't like them, their personality or something like that. It a lot of times means that that's just not something that you're either fit to do or that you even enjoy doing, which makes you a better advisor, because everybody that walks in the door knows you're doing the type of advising that you like to do.
I think it definitely shows some maturity.
Yeah.
With yourself, with your business, knowing that if I turn this down, I'm still going to be okay.
Yeah, that's probably why I didn't make it. I would have had to have shown maturity.
Well, you just called me old a moment ago.
I said seasoned. I take it back. Well, speaking of, though, you've been in the industry now 10 years, over 10 years?
Boy, it all blurs together. And 10 or 11.
Yeah.
That first year was long.
Yeah.
When you and I started together, obtaining licensure and things like that. So I don't ever remember what my actual activation date was. I know that it was around the economic downfall, though, of 2008. That was essentially where you and I began.
Yeah.
Which I think was a game changer. I think it made a huge difference. And we can definitely talk about that. But I will say 10 and a half. How's that sound?
That sounds good. Yeah, because I was going to say I graduated in 2009, and then I know I had like one class that I had to take in the summer because I went from the theater degree to the personal financial planning degree. Best timing ever to have a personal financial planning degree when it was 2009, like July. Watching the market tank, it's like, well, I can't get any worse. This will be fun. And I think I got activated in either October or November, and I know you had been there a little bit before I had. But again, like it's got to be interesting to see the way that people are being taught in the industry coming in now as opposed to then, because then it was like, okay, well, everything's down, so take advantage of it. Now it's like people have been riding high with their advisors for several years. What's the angle now?
Everything was down, take advantage of it was probably the mantra within an educational environment, which I mean, and the audience knows I don't have a background in finance. So I didn't have that experience. My take on the economic downfall and what I mean by it being a game changer is I really feel like most advisors' mantra at that moment, as far as their business mantra, was I will do everything I can to avoid having a conversation with my clientele because that will give them a reason to leave.
Right.
And if I don't reach out, maybe they won't think things are that bad, and I'll be able to get through this as I always have in the past.
And I'll call them when they have a 25% gain in the quarter because
exactly.
they're so far down.
Yeah, I'll share with them the good news, but I'll keep them from the bad news kind of thing. That was a very scary time.
Yeah.
And it's almost so far removed now that I think people have forgotten how scary it was. I can't even remember how many days went by before the Dow showed anything positive. I mean, I used to know the total, but obviously it's been a long time. It was a long period of time. And in my experience, the collective feeling of the public was, I understand things are bad. I just would like to know how bad they are, and should I do anything? I need some advice. This is what I'm paying for. And advisors weren't giving that. I feel like, although maybe I didn't notice it at the time, the amount of clientele I was able to pick up over that period of time, because I would talk to anybody, and most advisors wouldn't talk to anybody at all. a lot of advisors got fired over that 16-month period of time, and I feel like I grew significantly faster than most people would entering at another point.
Yeah.
And I was there to help essentially, and anything I was going to do was better than what they were receiving.
Right. Well, it's interesting. That was it was a strange time, and especially when you deal with the markets every day. I mean, I can't remember who made this quote, but they said that the Dow has predicted 10 of the last 7 recessions. So people look at the markets and they think like, oh, things are going down, it's going to be bad, and then all of a sudden it pops back up. This was like the worst time, and I shouldn't say like when I'm talking. That just makes me sound like an idiot. But no, you can laugh. It's okay. But at that time, when you have a recession and it's, more market generated, then the market goes down. You're scared because you're losing money. But for the most part, things might condense a bit. But for the most part, you watch it and it slowly grows. You might not see wage growth as much. That recession was people were losing houses, people were losing jobs, businesses were going out. Even in urban cores, where you had, just small businesses, small-time businesses, people were having to shut their doors because things were so bad because nobody had money. So it was this very, very strange time where the Dow was crashing. But even more so than that, it didn't matter what your 401k looked like at the time. It mattered that you were losing your house. Mm-hmm. And what a terrifying time to not call the people that you're supposed to be in charge of. And that's something that I really wanted to bring up with you, too, was I thought you might be throwing up over there. I was a little worried about it.
Didn't want to clear my throat into the microphone.
Fair enough. But when we got to that time, you saw the negative side of a financial advisor that didn't really do much. They just collected assets. Mm-hmm. And then our government decided we need to put regulation in place to make sure that people actually take care of their clients, that their fiduciaries for their clients. And I know that you had talked to me about that, year ago, 2 years ago, whenever the legislation was passed or came out. Now that's changed. We don't have that anymore. And speaking of somebody that's in the industry, I know a lot of people were not fans of it. But even more, but people that were like you, where you have a firm that can handle so many different types of people, and you actually follow up with your clients, you talk to your clients, and that's the reason that you do what you do, because you're talking about their financial lives. That's probably not a good thing for you, because you actually follow the rules and do the right thing. So how did you all respond to that when it was going to come out, and then when it was eventually retracted?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's this is something that when I've discussed this with colleagues across the industry, everybody always had something negative to say about, because what you're referring to is the Department of Labor regulation.
Yep.
That would it would essentially mandate advisors to be a fiduciary to their clientele. There were some changes across the industry that would change some of the products to where you weren't receiving a bunch of commissions up front. Commissionable business was essentially going to become a thing of the past.
Yeah.
And I think you have to take a step back and look at how we even got to this point, because if you look 20 years ago, there was no such thing as a financial advisor. Everybody was a stockbroker. Mm-hmm. And that emerged into this idea of financial planning for people's future, and maybe doing a little bit more than just managing their money. Well, there are an awful lot of advisors that have held themselves out as financial planners, but have really still done nothing more than manage people's assets. So for them, this was a very scary change, and something that was really going to affect their business. It was going to be incredibly costly. They were going to have to do their business completely different. In my mind, I say this a lot, and people laugh at me. I say I love what I do, but I really don't like my industry very much, mm-hmm. and I don't like a large portion of my industry that really doesn't do a whole lot for their clientele, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm a complete quarterback of somebody's financial life. Anything financially related or anything outside of that, I essentially am involved in. When somebody passes away, I make sure that I'm helping with their family, whether they're clientele or not, because that's what I feel like I've signed up to do.
Right.
To get back to your question, how did I feel about it? I thought it was something that was very necessary. Whether or not it should have come from the Department of Labor is maybe in question.
Right.
But I don't know why you would fight something that essentially wants to level the playing field a little bit, mm-hmm. get rid of individuals in our industry that maybe don't have their client's best interest at heart.
Right.
And do things, I guess, that more justify what we get paid to do.
Yeah.
As far as how it affected our firm, it really didn't.
Because you were already doing it.
We were already, I mean, we had been a fee-based advisory service for a long time.
Now, for those who are listening, tell the difference between fee-based.
Yeah, thank you. So, this is something you don't think about. You think I'm going to go to a financial professional. They're going to, one, know exactly what they're doing, and two, they're going to have my best interest at heart anyway. Why do we need a rule like this? And three, everybody's going to be the same. And none of the three of those are really true.
Yeah.
This is an interesting industry because you don't even really need any formal education. You just need to be able to pass the Series 7 exam, which is not easy. So you've got that piece of it. But once you pass that exam, you don't really know how to do anything necessarily.
Right, you know how to pass a test.
You know how to pass a test. You don't really know how to plan. Two, there was an awful lot of people that were charging a lot of commissions up front, which is a commission-based advisor, meaning that I will sell you products and I'm going to get paid a bunch up front, and then the next time we need to make a change, I'm going to sell you some different products and I'm going to get paid a whole bunch up front, which would beg me to wonder, as a consumer, does the person on the other end or the advisor have my best interest at heart, or do they just need to make some money at this time and that's why we're making changes?
Right.
A fee-based advisor, and the reason why it says based is because there are some things that we will do for people that we have no other choice than to charge a commission, and like if we're going to write somebody life insurance. But other than that, everything is just a straight flat fee. Anytime we're making changes to anything that we're doing for you, it's all included in that fee, so you don't ever have to take that into consideration of, is this in my best interest or not? It must be, because it's part of the fee. So that's the difference, essentially. A commission-based advisor gets paid for every piece of business that they do for you, and then you may not hear from them again because they're not getting paid anything, whereas a fee-based advisor just charges a flat fee across the board. Is that a good enough description?
Yeah, and all the services are included with that. So when you do, when you have to update the plan, when you have to call somebody about it, that's just part of what you're paying for is within that fee.
Yeah, it's more one-stop shop, I guess, if you will. But and that's what we were doing. We saw that, one, that's makes sense.
Yeah.
And two, I mean, a number of years back, we saw that was probably the way the industry would go. We were right on that, I believe. And that's an all-encompassing service. So the Department of Labor change really didn't affect us, and we saw our assumption was if it would have passed, which it didn't. It ended up failing due to change in Washington.
Yep.
Our assumption was if it would have passed, that we would have probably lost 30% of the advisors in the industry, which may not have been a bad thing.
Right. Yeah, you were talking a second ago about how you feel about your own industry, and it's like, welcome to the real estate world too. Like, I think any realtor you talk to probably has several names on their phone that they just kind of cringe whenever they get the phone call from them. But so what do you think is, when somebody comes in and they see that you're a financial advisor, because you spoke of the idea that a lot of people think that every financial advisor is the same thing. And you and I both know that because we've been in the industry. You've obviously been in it longer than I was, but there are almost an infinite number of advisors that, like, they change year to year as opposed to just staying, the same thing for 30 years. So what do you think is the most, when somebody comes in who's new, who either has had an advisor or just had one back in the day or never has had an advisor, what's the most misunderstood thing about what you do as opposed to what they anticipate you're going to tell them?
From a client perspective, or from a prospect perspective?
Exactly.
Wow, that's a really good question. It ranges so widely because so let's break it up into two. Let's say someone that comes in that has an experience with an advisor in the past, which you'd be really surprised as to how many people have not had that. I did the math one time, and it looks like to me probably fewer than 5% of the population actually uses an advisor, which is odd, but that's probably pretty close. So someone that has no advisory experience really comes in with the preconceived notion of, I guess you're going to take my old 401k and tell me if I should do something different with it, and that's about it. So the breadth of service that we offer is obviously significantly wider than that. Managing money is a piece of it. But that's, that at the time may not be the most important piece, depending upon what's going on in their life. Someone that has had an advisor before, the the biggest, I guess the underlying theme that I will hear more times than not is I just want somebody that will call me at least once a year, which I'm usually floored with. I don't even understand how you can essentially charge someone and not talk to them
Right.
at least once a year. So the bar is not set very high. Those are, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's essentially what I tend to hear more often than not. I really don't hear people that come in and say, I want X, Y, and Z because this is what I've had in the past. For the most part, people are even surprised that I'm going to do a financial plan for them, and they don't even know what that means.
Right.
Kind of on a side note. So I started working with someone new last month, and it's a husband and wife that have been this is a blended family, essentially. So they were both married in the past. They both have children from previous marriage and have gotten together and have a good life now.
Yeah.
But whenever you add complications such as an ex-spouse or children from another marriage or whatever, it causes some issues down the road.
Yeah.
How is money going to get passed to them? These are real conversations we need to think about.
And they're hard conversations.
They can be.
Yeah.
And how does a new spouse feel about their new spouse's child that is not really theirs, about paying for them to go to school,
right?
Things like this. How do people really feel about this? And generally, when people come in, that's one of the first things that I'll talk with them about. We have something that's called a discovery meeting, and it's called a discovery meeting because you may not have thought about some of this before, and your spouse may not know. But maybe you have thought about it, but your spouse doesn't know what you think.
Right.
Something that that drives me crazy is one of the questions most advisors ask are, "What are your goals?" And I would say that most people on the other side of the table don't know. Because they've never really thought about it.
Well, and if you force them into the situation, you're probably saying, like, pay for college, retire.
Yeah, they'll say, I guess I want to retire at 65 because that's the textbook answer.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's true, and that's probably not the only thing that's important to them in life.
Right.
We really talk about these things. So anyway, back to this couple. The wife worked for a school district for a period of time and had a retirement benefit through that district. But when I was reviewing it, I realized that she was about 99% vested into that, meaning that if she did nothing, she was not going to be able to have any part of that benefit at all. And there's a pretty simple solution where basically you can buy that time that she didn't actually work, and then you have access to the benefit. And that was all I said. I just said I was reviewing this. This is something that you own, but if we do nothing, and you have until next year to make this determination. If you do nothing, you're basically throwing this money away. And here's a pretty simple solution to where you can actually access that. Then we can determine what we want to do. And she looked at her husband and said, that was all I needed to know. I don't even need to know anything else. He obviously is going to provide benefit because I've been working with our past advisor for 10 years and he never mentioned this. All he said is when you start to use this benefit, fill in the blank.
Right.
But never took the time to look to see that she actually was not going to have it. She was going to miss out on it.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, I guess that's what I feel like people should expect. And whether you've worked with an advisor or not, people tend to come to me not realizing that that's the level of service that they should be asking for.
Yeah, and I think the level of service on that side is amazing because stories like that are the ones that you get to carry forward and say, hey, here's part of the reason that you need somebody that's going to be in your corner, because it's not just about the amount of money that we have here. Fantastic, that's back here now. Let's talk about what your life needs to look like, or what your life should look like because of what you have currently.
Yeah.
And I know that our personal situation, when we had our trust set up, there was the issue that, we didn't have one little line set up correctly, and it wouldn't, we'd be gone, wouldn't have caused us much of an issue. But at the time that we passed, it would have caused whoever had to deal with that a big issue. And it was just one way that we were, TODing or whatever it was to our trust, and you caught it, talked with our estate lawyer, and like, yep, that's absolutely incorrect. Let's change it. Boom, done. It took, a couple of phone calls, and it was over.
And that's the thing. And I'm going to talk myself out of a job here.
I was going to say, to me, the positive is, when, like we were talking about earlier, nobody is an expert in everything. And even if you are an expert, mistakes are made, and that's completely innocent as long as you have multiple eyes on the table that are all focused on their client.
Well, and that's kind of what I was going to say, to the sense that these types of issues, whether it's when you sit down for your very first job and HR hands you a big packet of information on your retirement plan and your health benefits, typically people don't even really know what to do with that, or what it means. This is something that we all have to deal with once we get into the quote unquote real world. These are adult things, I guess, that we all have to deal with, and there's really no opportunity to receive any type of training whatsoever for them. And I always kind of get up on my soapbox and say, I wish there was a way that we could correct that system earlier on, so that at least people weren't fearful of these processes that we're all going to have to deal with. That's why I said I'm going to talk myself out of a job here, because this is what I do. But it is frustrating, and it really kind of leads to why I ended up even going into this profession to begin with, because this is a second career for me. I spent a number of years as a pharmaceutical rep, so I always tell people I used to sell drugs, but they were just legal. And I really got into that because I wanted to provide a benefit to physicians. They have a lot of information coming at them that they have a hard time keeping up with. So I felt like that was my job, was to provide the information of new research that was going on, and hopefully they would sell my drug because it would work. Mm-hmm. And I realized that was not really what you got to do. You do get to do that in this profession a lot, because this is something that people really need.
Right.
They need somebody trusted. I mean, if you peel back the curtain, our industry is really not that difficult, whereas nothing probably really is if you know it well enough. But our industry what the things we deal with are scary for people, because people just assume that they, one, do not understand, and two, they're probably not going to.
Right. Yeah, it is an interesting one, because there are so many. I think when you're professionally licensed, there are a lot of careers that people automatically determine that this person is very well educated, this person knows exactly what they're doing. And I think about, obviously in my household with my wife being an attorney, like you go to school for 3 years, you get, you pass the bar, and then you start being an attorney, and then you look at real estate agents, and there are so many real estate agents out there that you're just like, hey, you probably just have to pass a little test, and then you get to have a part-time career.
Well, your wife is very, very, very well educated.
Oh,
very smart.
Yeah, I mean, she was.
We need to give her credit.
Oh, yeah, you're going to get me in trouble. No, she was top 3 in her class, order of the court, order of the barristers, clerked for an appellate judge.
All
she's
right,
got
got it.
I know, she's the best. I love you, but no, but I mean, you see that, and it's like just certain careers that hold licensure seem to track a little bit differently. Financial advisors, I mean, how many times when we first came into the industry, we came in with Waddell and Reed, and we had people that would come in and talk about, I'm fine saying it, they were a great place.
Okay.
But no, when we came into the industry, but the thing that I did like about them was they brought people in at times, not everybody, but at times they would bring somebody in that would say, here's what people think. If you say you're a financial, do you remember the conversation? I can't remember who it was that came in, but it was like, if you say you're a financial advisor, their brain's going to shut off. I think it might have been Rick that said it.
Yeah.
But,
most things that we learned in that day came from him.
Exactly.
I still, this is not going to, your audience is not going to find this interesting, but the individual that trained Alex and I still see his face in my head a lot when I'm making a decision.
Yeah.
And the things that he would say have lived on, and they've seem to be true. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I just really enjoyed his part of the conversation, because he would say, because at that point you're, he's turning you into a salesman, which essentially you especially are in the very beginning, before you feel like you become an advisor. And, it was always like the card thing, like, don't just throw out a business card because it's going to go in the trash. Don't do this because it's going to go in the trash. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see when somebody needs something on the financial side, a lot of times they'll go online because they think that the person that they would go see is a stockbroker in a suit that's just going to sell them a product, as opposed to somebody who is, actually there for them, that's going to take a look at their lives and is going to go past the question of what are your goals, and they say, pay for my kids' college and retirement, and you say, okay, great answer. Now let's talk about what all that actually means.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of the industry, because just not many people see that. And the future is so important, that the goals that you have are so important, and you don't really know what you're looking for. One of the best examples that we had, not only at Waddell when we were training, but that I had in school, was when you think about somebody who's in retirement. If they retire at 60, 65, whatever it might be, you automatically think, well, they need to have these very conservative investments, and that's all they need. And it's like, well, what if they lived to 95? That's 30 years worth of gain that they could have potentially earned, but you don't think of that because you just think 65, they need this much income, and that's it. And if that's the type of advisor you're working with, that can put you in a real hole if you turn 85 and are all of a sudden going like, well, thanks, inflation, you're kind of kicking my ass at this point. But it takes those conversations to actually know, like, okay, well, that makes sense. Now how do we approach it? And I think that's what, as far as the educational background, as far as the Series 7, that can cover fixing that on a sheet of paper. But an advisor who's able to have a conversation is going to be able to explain that, help people understand that, and help them have confidence going forward. And that, again, is where I think people like you come in, where it's not just a transactional business. It really is a fully committed individual.
Well, and I'm kind of glad you said that because it kind of hits an area for me, but I'll back up. I will tell you. So the exact quote was, if you would like to have someone leave you alone on an airplane, tell them either you're a financial advisor or you sell insurance. And it's probably relatively true.
Oh yeah.
But no, I think you make a very good point, and I think this spans all industries. We as humans want to impress upon others that we know something.
Right.
And that's definitely true in our industry. And I feel like more times than not, whether you're an advisor or you're a physician or something along those lines, what you generally will go to first is, what I'm going to do is impress you with everything that I know. And I kind of don't care if you understand or not, because you're going to know that I know it, and therefore you're going to be so impressed that you're going to hire me.
Right.
And that's not true. I mean, if you think back to how you choose anyone that you work with, you're going to choose the person that is able to explain to you what you're doing in a manner that you understand, and to the point that you need to understand it.
Right.
I hate going to, and I throw my wife's industry into the bus all the time. My wife is a dermatologist, and I'm sorry, she does a great job. However, whenever I go to the doctor, I can always tell the one that I'm not going to work with, because they'll start spouting off a bunch of information, and I just will shake my head, yes, because I don't even know what to ask them.
Right.
And I don't really feel comfortable with what we're doing, but I don't even know what you're talking about enough to ask you. And I'm not brave enough to say, wait, I don't understand you.
Yeah.
Can you start over? And I kind of feel like the things that we are dealing with are very simplistic in the end. For the most part, whether you're talking about retirement, whether you're talking about saving money for kids, whether you're really anything you're talking about, the only thing that the person on the other end of the table really wants to know is, can I do what I'm trying to do?
Right.
Do I need to change, or am I on a path to do exactly what I need to do? And what does that look like? If I'm not on that path, what path am I on? And I think you can offer that very easily. You don't have to show them all these graphs about their net worth and things that really, at the end of the day, don't make a difference.
Right.
I mean, think about it. If your net worth is $1 million or $1.5 million, what does that do for you at the end of the day, except maybe stroke your ego a little bit? But
right.
I mean, it may just be that you have this huge house that you're not going to sell
right.
at any point in the future. It's not really going to.
It's not making you money.
It's not going to make any difference for your life necessarily.
Right.
So what does that matter? If we're talking about retirement, for instance, I believe, at least the people that have been attracted to work with me, what they want to know is, if I am, we're going to use the stereotypical 65. If I'm 65 today and I decide to stop working and I'm going to pay myself instead of my employer, because that's all retirement is.
Yep.
How much am I going to have to live off of? And is that going to work? If it's not going to work, what do I need to do differently? Is it going to affect my life too much now? And I think you can explain that pretty easily. And I tend to try to, I'm very anticlimactic a lot of times when I speak with people. I don't have this huge build up to, and ta-da, everything's going to be fine.
Have the chart waiting in the background.
Ex-
and
and
no.
you're-
Oh, sorry.
Exactly.
You lost, but thanks for coming.
But I think that's I think that as a process, you know, I think it's normal or natural at least to try to do that because you're trying to build up your worth.
Right.
There's been and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going off into another area,
You're
but it has been I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to data, I guess, if you will.
No.
Yes, it all goes back to my background, which was not finance. But you know, the data suggests, and I think this actually will probably lead into a conversation of, you know, what I think is most important. Maybe you're the host.
Yeah, you take it over, man. It's your world. I'm just living that.
But I mean, the data really shows that there's a huge increase in anxiety for people when they come to meet with a financial advisor. And it could be someone that they even have a good relationship with and have worked with for years. And I think this gets really overlooked and not paid attention to enough by anyone. But the data suggests that you can have an increase in anxiety as much as 75% when you're meeting with an advisor, even if you know them well, because they may tell you something that you don't want to hear. They may tell you bad news. They may say something that makes you feel stupid. You know, all these things lead to, whether it's conscious or not, an increase in anxiety. So if you think about a 75% increase in anxiety, that is equivalent to someone going to the dentist. And, you know, what can we do to alleviate that some? Well, obviously you can put a fish tank in your office like every dentist's office has, because that's been proven to help. But I mean, more along the lines of, I think when you are getting ready to talk to somebody, you can say, I'm going to cut to the chase. We're going to talk about what this means, but I'm going to tell you right now that things look good. You're in really good shape. And we're going to talk about what that means. But, you know, you will see people's shoulders drop a little bit of, okay, well, thank goodness. I'm glad to hear that. Now talk to me about what that means. That doesn't mean that you say things don't look good.
Right.
You can build to that. You know, and I think that, I don't know, do you mind if I change to something?
Go ahead.
Because I was going to talk a little bit about, I've spoken to a number of people in my industry, and the thing that I get asked the most often is, what do you think is the most important issue facing our industry right now? You know, is it the fact that, you know, a computer can do our job? Is it the fact that the markets may go down? Is it the fact that, you know, we might be in an election year and that may cause things to happen? And I say, you know, or do you think it's that, do you think the biggest benefit that you bring to people is that, you know, you're so incredibly brilliant and you're going to come up with all these solutions, you know, with ways of managing money that no one else is doing?
Well, that one, but
well, and you know, you have to bring a level of intelligence and professionalism to anything you do. You know, what I'm about to say, if you don't have that, if you don't have a good product, it really doesn't matter what you do. People are not going to come back. But, you know, I kind of feel like in a lot of ways, we are in the business of making sure that people have as good of an experience as they can have during the entirety of their time working with me, or working with anyone in our industry for that matter.
Right.
You know, what does that mean? Why is that important? The reason why I think it's important is because, for one, a lot of people aren't doing it. But two, you know, I mean, it really has been proven that, you know, managing money is not super difficult. You know, computers do a relatively decent job of doing that. And if that's all you need, maybe that's not a bad option. It's certainly less expensive. But if you need something that's more all-encompassing, you know, then it makes sense to hire someone like me. But I want to make sure that you have, you know, the best experience that you can have from start to finish. And that doesn't mean that I'm, you know, paying for trips for you or anything like that. But I do tend to spend an awful lot of time on the little things. You know, you and I live in the Midwest. People here tend to be polite to their detriment a little bit. When people will come into an office, and if someone says to them, you know, would you like something to drink? 9 times out of 10, people are going to say no. They probably want something, but they're polite.
Right.
And that is almost seen a little bit as a negative to them. I know that sounds odd. You know, so how can we make that situation better? You know, what changes can we make to make that more of a positive interaction that someone would have within our office? We went so far as to say, when someone comes to our office, we don't have a parking garage. What if it's raining outside?
Yeah.
That's a somewhat negative experience all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, when you start out your meeting like that,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it's when so we really spent a whole lot of time walking on that. Now, we weren't going to build a parking garage, we weren't going to build a huge awning, but essentially, what can we do to make that better? We've been very meticulous about our office. Most of the time, when you walk into any type of bank or financial services industry, what's playing on TV? Well, CNBC, and it may be really negative news. Is that how you really want to start your meeting when what's going on today doesn't really matter for that person on the other side of the table? We as advisors have to look through the lens of the future for them. What can we do today that makes a difference 5 or 10 years down the road?
Right.
It doesn't really matter if the Dow is down 200 points today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, it's interesting that you're looking at psychology, not only in your meetings with the individual, but just in the overall aspect of what does it mean to come into a financial advisor's office. Because to me, to add to that and kind of backtrack a little bit to where we were before, it's a very interesting concept to me that if somebody's anxiety goes up 75% to a financial advisor, and you also know that the leading cause of divorce is financial issue, then you know that the biggest issue facing like our mentality, or maybe not the biggest, but one of the biggest issues, one of our biggest stressors is worry about money. And that is one of the things that I'll say, whether you believe it or not, a computer probably can't help you with the worry as much. And so even if you utilize a computer to help you put together a portfolio, help you do all of the data-driven analysis that you like to do, the one-on-one connection with an individual to say when they come in the office that you're okay, or there are some things we need to work on, to give them that, I think is a huge relief, and is probably really good for a couple, especially with kids. I mean, any type of stress that's in your life, it's good to have somebody that can alleviate some of that. So I think it's a positive thing on your side, but it's also interesting to me that, going back even further to what we were talking about, if you have a transactional individual who is, getting paid money off of you, and there's no benefit to them outside of, maybe having, your stocks in the right account or your mutual funds in the right account for that year because they go up, fantastic. But if you don't know where you're going forward, that's probably not good for your overall mental health. What do you think? Do you think there's?
No, I completely agree, and I definitely want to give a commercial for myself to say that I feel like that I do a fantastic job. I think that my ability to listen and ask questions that a computer is certainly not going to ask you, that may come from body language even, might be incredibly important in somebody's life. No, it is everything, and a computer can't read difference in inflection and voice where someone says something and maybe you don't completely believe that that's what they think. That might lead you to ask another question. Maybe okay, you just told me that this is important, maybe let's talk about why.
Right.
And I think you do have to bring psychology and philosophy into this type of relationship to really provide a good benefit that a computer's not going to be able to do. I think you can equate our business very easily to, would you want, a lot of people do like to go into WebMD, but would you allow your computer, your desktop to perform some sort of surgery on you, or would you want it to remove a brain tumor? Probably not.
Right. At least not without some type of oversight, right?
It probably just not, period.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things that can be misread that a human can get just from essentially listening to you and how things are. I think that can be equated into this.
That's true.
And I guess my point was that if that is your sole focus, is to basically manage somebody's money from them only, maybe you're better served by not having an actual human. But if you really need to, my meetings are interesting, and I hate to keep saying mine, but they're interesting in the sense the depth where we will go, which I think is important for myself to know, and maybe for you to discover about yourself, so that we can truly make sure that happens. But they go a lot of times outside of the realm of traditional finance, or we talk about things that are much more in depth than just how much money have you saved and what do you want to do and how much do you spend.
Yep, you'll need this in retirement by.
Yeah, do you have your 2.5 kids? And it goes way beyond that. And sometimes I don't know. I mean, I guess I almost look at my profession more along the lines of being a resource to someone for whatever they happen to need at that moment. And sometimes that might not be within my area of expertise. It may not even be within finance.
Yeah.
And how do I provide that to someone?
Yeah. Well, so going from theater to finance, which was what I did initially, was left brain, right brain, just in full war with each other at that point. But you have kind of an interesting backstory as well, because your major was not finance. It wasn't anything, I would say, close to finance. You were biology, right?
Yeah. Biology with a number of minors that crossed both left and right hemispheres. Yeah.
And then, so that was Pittsburgh State University. And then what's your story from there? I mean, you met Jessie when you guys were both pretty young. You guys waited to have kids. She went to Florida. You got to enjoy Florida when she was in school. And then, I mean, going from all of that to a drug rep, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just say that. And then to, becoming a financial advisor. And it's an industry where, it's sink or swim. And for a number of years, you, just like a lot of other, successful salespeople, successful advisors, they have to find out a lot about themselves and how they interact with individuals. And we, sat through, I don't know how many sales meetings and different types of programs and everything else.
40 hours a month.
40 hours a month. Yeah. Geez. I don't miss those days. But you got a lot of different ideas, and obviously all of those different things, with the books you were reading, the seminars that we attended, and even like the in-house sales seminars that we had to attend, all brought you to the point that you're at today, where you know how to have a conversation with an individual. So what was it like when you were first starting here? I mean, we touched on a little bit of what the market was like when we came in, but what was your mentality about the industry?
It's not where I thought you were going.
Well, if you want to take it somewhere else, do it.
No, well, I mean, we talk a lot about what we've done in the past,
Yeah.
and you're right. I would not be who I am today without those. I felt like you're always just a collection of your past experience, and that's who you are right at this moment. And who I am now will not be the same as I will be in 10 years, because I'll have had 10 years more worth of experience. But yeah, I'm going to circle back around to your question so that hopefully it makes a little bit more sense.
You're good.
I studied biology. My intent at the time was to go into medicine of some sort. So I've actually had a few hidden careers along the way other than pharmaceutical rep. Applied to school, did all that stuff, decided before I went off to school that I wanted to ensure that I wanted to spend the next handful of years of my life pursuing medicine. So I worked as a laboratory tech in a hospital, and I didn't enjoy the person I became.
What do you mean?
Well, not to throw that industry completely under the bus, because maybe this was solely my experience, but in talking to others, I don't know if this is the case.
Yeah.
Medicine is an interesting animal in the sense that medicine at its essence is divided up into a number of different areas of specialty. So that's why when you go into a hospital, you have all these different departments.
Right.
And the reason for that is obviously because not one individual can know everything. You cannot be an expert in everything. That's, in theory, what's going on there, and that's not what happens. What happens is each department believes that they know everything, and no other department knows much of anything. And I really, without going into, well, I actually have an interesting story, and it was the turning point for me. And I had a day where I was, down in the lab doing something, who knows, probably running tests on somebody's blood or something.
Something very interesting.
Something very interesting. And I got a phone call from a nurse that needed me to, or we had an order come in from a nurse on one of the floors where we needed to go up and draw some labs on a patient. And I went up into the room, and I still remember this very clearly, and it's been, 20 years now.
Yeah.
But I remember walking into the room, and you have your little spiel that you always say, hey, my name's Brian, I'm here, I'm going to draw some blood from you. And if it was, my shift would start at 3 a.m., so typically it was dark.
Oh, man.
And you'd always just kind of go through the spiel. I'm here to draw some blood. I'm going to flip your light on. It's going to be really bright. That was the thing I would always say to people. And I never got used to the fact that I had to wake people up, by the way. But I remember walking into this particular room, and there were a lot of people in that room, a lot of family members. And I just thought, you know what? This is a very nice situation, because typically you don't see that. Typically, especially that early in the morning, no one's there.
Yeah.
And you think, this person must not be doing well, and thankfully he has his family here. So I'm talking, and I go, and everybody's kind of looking at me a little bit, and I'm not really reading the situation very well.
Yeah.
And I walk over to the bed and look down, and clearly the patient has passed away. And I have no idea. And there are probably 25 people in the room just looking at me, thinking, I can't imagine what they're thinking, but I'm sure it was something along the lines of, what are they doing at this hospital? You know, they must not know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I remember walking out of the room, and the nurse comes running down, at me, full speed, yelling as loud as she can, just berating me up and down about how could I possibly go in there and interfere with that family. And I just stood and listened to her for a while. And finally she stopped talking, and she looked like a cartoon character, just breathing real heavily, like, I've gotten everything out that I can.
Yeah.
And I just very calmly said, "Are you done?" And she said, "What do you mean, am I done?" And I said, are you done with what you're telling me?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "This could have all been avoided very easily if you'd have taken this order out of the computer." And I threw the order at her, and I just walked out, got downstairs, and I was just, mad at this point. Get a phone call from another nurse on a floor, and this is gross. So, if you're eating, you might want to not listen for the next 10 seconds.
Yeah.
But there is a nurse calls down and says, I had a patient vomit. I've collected it, and I think there's a worm in it. And I remember hanging up the phone, looking at one of my colleagues, just talking about how ridiculous I thought this nurse was, that there was a worm in this person's specimen. Get it down to the lab, and it's very clear that's exactly what it is. And I just remember having a moment at that time thinking, who am I to say that this person doesn't know what they're talking about? That's ultimately why they're there. This is not my personality. How did I turn into this? And knew that was something I didn't want to do. So that was a really long story to say. Even though that was not necessarily a positive experience in my life, I think it's added a lot to who I am today.
Yeah.
I spent a period of time working as an audio engineer. I mean, you know what? When you're young, you try to figure out what you want to be.
Yeah. I was in theater.
You were in theater?
Yeah. I still have friends. I mean, one of my favorite things on social media is to see all of my friends that are in theater. And I just think I loved it. I've done community theater since then. It's absolutely a passion of mine. But that analytical side of me always has to have numbers in it too.
It wins out.
Yeah, it does. So it's like, I need to find a way to blend this. I need to own a theater because I can look at numbers, and you can't really do that.
It's probably not a very good money making.
No, it's not at times.
Yeah. But I mean, I did that. That was one of the first jobs I ever was fired from. And I remember we were loading up some speakers at like 2:00 in the morning, and I was loading it. I had one side, and then the guy that owned the company had the other side, and it slipped out of my hand, and it dropped and broke his toe. And I was fired on the spot basically at that moment. And I think it was because I didn't ask him if he was okay, because I was so shocked.
If he stops crying, would you have been like, "Are you done?"
Touche. I worked with adults with disabilities, which was really very rewarding. And, I think it's kind of been this culmination of, what am I looking for in a career? You mentioned I was a pharmaceutical rep. And I'd always find pieces of all those careers that I really, that I enjoyed, but the entire career wasn't necessarily as satisfying as it should be, or I didn't maybe have the passion for the end product as much as I should. The reason how I came to financial services was kind of twofold. One was when I was in my previous career, I worked with a lot of younger people that had just graduated from college, and they would always come to me after they'd get this huge HR packet that we talked about earlier in the podcast. And, what do I do with this? You seem like you know what you're doing. So that part seemed sort of like a natural fit. And then I came to a point where I got a little bit sideways too with my boss at the time. And I was basically given the option of a huge demotion or resignation, and I chose resignation. And then, kind of said, we had a financial advisor at the time, and I thought, this is something that I really believe I would enjoy. Plus, I'd be self-employed. I can kind of make it whatever I want.
Yeah.
So that's really what I wanted when I came into the industry. Now, 20 minutes later, to answer your question, is I was really trying to find something where I felt like I could make a difference that obviously I could earn a living.
Yeah.
And do it in an area where I felt like I could communicate well. I think since I didn't grow up in the finance world, it provides an interesting perspective for me because, I remember day one of studying for the exams. And I remember learning things that I felt like, boy, I really probably should know this. And I'm surprised that I don't. I'm almost ashamed that I don't. But because I don't know it and I don't consider myself someone that's unintelligent, there are probably an awful lot of people out there that are in the same boat.
Right.
So I've always taken that with me of, how can I explain this in a way that I would have understood when I was first getting into this industry? Like you've experienced as well. I think the sales process you go through when you're recruited to come into this industry is incredibly unfair.
Yeah.
I think that you're given a very false sense of what can happen in a very short period of time. And what is it, like 98% of people fail in this industry within
the
their
first 3 years. Yeah.
And first year's really high. First 3 years is not much better because it's definitely not a money-making venture at the beginning.
Yeah.
I knew from the very beginning that I needed to get to a point where I made enough money to where my wife would stop asking me if we were going to always pay for me to have a job. So that was very motivating.
Yeah.
And you kind of talked about that one of the leading causes of divorce is fight over money. We weren't fighting. We just were flat out not talking about it. And I was trying to avoid her at all costs and really did not want that to always be the case.
Yeah.
My first year, and I've come a long way since then, thankfully. Actually, we can even back up. I remember my very first check that I got as a financial advisor. I still have a copy of it because I thought, this is awesome. I'm a professional. Somebody actually paid me to do this. And once I got over that little, exuberance, looking down, realizing the check was for $200.
Yeah.
And that was all I had made. I thought that my second thought was, I hope the checks get bigger than this at some point. And they didn't for a while.
Yeah.
My first year, you beat me my first year probably by quite a bit. I made $4,000 my first year. And now that is out there recorded for everybody to laugh. But that's, and I think my expenses are really high. And
Yeah, you lost money.
I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. I was not following the traditional model. I saw something different, and I knew what I wanted to build, and I knew it was going to take time.
Yeah.
And, thankfully, my wife, who really was a great support, even though I'm sure she questioned this decision a lot, stuck by me and said, whatever you need to do, you need to do.
Yeah.
But coming into the industry, I really just wanted to find something that I thought would make a difference. And I think it's proven to have done that at really odd times throughout people's lives for me.
It's such an interesting industry when you look at the people that come in and actually succeed right off the bat, because 90% of the time it does seem like it's somebody who, we always joked about it at the time. It's like somebody who has gray hair, somebody who's been around for a little bit longer in a different industry, and they have a catalog of individuals built up that they can call, and they already have the trust there. It was interesting to me to think about, and the further I get away from the industry and the number of years, the more I really kind of reflect on the idea that when I graduated, I was 22 years old, and I didn't know shit about what people needed. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't lived. I hadn't paid my own. I paid bills, but it wasn't like I was out there, had a career, knew how to balance, my own personal budget. I had my own house in college, and I did all that, all the adult stuff because I was off campus and was probably a nerd. I was.
Still are.
Still am, and proud of it. I've got a Game of Thrones poster in here. How nerdy does that get? But when you think about it, it's like, I was 22 years old and I was trying to tell people how to invest their money. Then there's no reason that should have been happening. I mean, it's not that I think that people can succeed at that age. It's not that I think that anybody should look at you in a negative way if that's the case, because what you're trying to do is build a career. But I listened to. Have you ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk by chance? Gary V.
No.
You'd probably like him because he's ridiculously blunt and to the point. And one of the things
what are you trying to say there?
That you're ridiculously blunt and to the point. But unless you're trying to tell a story about how you got to one question, then it's a long way away.
When you ask me it 25 minutes later, I'm going, what did you ask me?
Yeah. No, but he has this point, and I thought it was a really good point. He's like, one of my favorite people in the world is a 22-year-old life coach. Like, you haven't lived. You haven't done that. And I think that there's a very good point to that in the financial world, in that if you look at it as a non-transactional business. If you're looking at it as a transactional business, then by all means, go ahead. But you have so much to learn if you're in this business and you're that young that you just don't know what you don't know. And there's nothing, again, I have no ill will towards somebody that's coming in trying to make it for a living, but there's probably going to be about 10 to 15 years worth of growth before you actually feel like, okay, now I've, whether you've been married, had kids, no matter what, you've lived, and now you can actually say, okay, now I understand what's going on. And if you would have told me that at 22 years old, I would have said some very not nice things and been like, I know exactly what I'm doing. And I didn't. I mean,
I remember those conversations.
Yeah, exactly. It's true. But I mean, I do think that that's a very important part of that industry is, and just like any other, like you have got to kind of earn your stripes before you can tell people what to do. And even like you said right when we started this, you can, scholastically, you can see it in a book. You can pass a test, but until you've lived, it's very tough to be a true financial advisor because you don't know how to ask the questions and you don't know the 10 different things that might also be important because you've had that life experience and you've met people, which is, I think, why there are certain people that transition into the industry very well from different ones like you did. Even though, your first check was $200 and that's the case, you were able to go up to somebody and actually have a conversation because you've done that for 10 years. I mean, part of the pharmaceutical rep, didn't you have to interview new people?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're bringing new people on and they're talking to you about their HR packet. You've had conversation back and forth and you know what's important to them. Whereas me at 22, it's like, I in college met the person that, I eventually married and had kids with and that kind of thing. But I still didn't know what life was until that point. And I think it's something to consider when you talk about some of the things that you're sold on. It's like, you have to be responsible if you're the person selling that vision to a 22-year-old too. Like you have to say, it might be a rough couple of years. I mean, Dustin cracked me up when that recruit came in and he was having a bad day and he just looked at him with his lean cuisine that he was about ready to eat and he's like, this is what it's going to be like for a couple of years.
It's so true. And I mean, even though our quote unquote class of new advisors, everybody was significantly younger than I was. Are we 11 years apart, something like that?
Just turned 32. So
yeah, so I was a year older than you when I started in this industry, but I still looked like I was your all's age.
Yeah, or younger.
Yeah,
you still do.
The last couple of years have not been as kind.
Yeah, 2 kids is always. It seems like
that'll do it.
It's fun.
But I mean, you're right. And I think even something like that for someone that looks a lot significantly younger than they are, I think you have to be fair. And I mean, part of the title financial advisor, it has advice right in it.
Right.
People have to you not only have to be able to provide advice, but you have to provide it in a manner where people will take it.
Right.
And you're right. A 22-year-old advising a 55-year-old that's a couple of years away from maybe early retirement. I don't know that there's always going to be that level of trust there.
Right.
And it may be somebody that's a lot less qualified, but just looks older.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe is really good at talking.
Yeah.
But doesn't know what they're talking about.
Right. And I think that's, anybody who's been in sales for a long time and transitions into this career, they might know how to grab that individual and have them as a client. But then it's about, like you said, the advisor part of the statement. It's like finance, one thing. But man, if you're not giving solid advice, you're doing that person a huge disservice, which again, going back to that legislation, like me and my past, I'm not exactly a big fan of additional legislation on anything. But when I looked at that, it was like, if you're in the industry and you're fighting against that, I probably know the kind of advisor that you are. And that's an unfortunate thing to say, because I'm sure there are good advisors, and I'm probably going to get yelled at by people that I made that comment. But it's absolutely true. It's like, if you're not already taking care of your clients in the way that it'd be like if they didn't have this legislation and they said you shouldn't drive drunk. Like, to me, it's the exact same thing.
I just laughed because that was not what I expected you to say. But you're right.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, well, yeah, I shouldn't, because I'm impaired. And in that situation, it's not that you're impaired. You're just not the fiduciary that an individual might need. And that's, I think it'll take a while for the industry to kind of catch up to that. And once it does, I think it's going to be a really good thing, because I don't think you necessarily, especially in this day and age with, virtual reality and, Skype calls, and you can talk to someone who's, in Japan right now, and it'll look like there's no lag time at all. I don't think that the nature of financial advisor necessarily means that you absolutely have to have a sit-down conversation with somebody, but you have to be able to look at somebody, listen to somebody, know what they're saying, almost without them having to come out and say it. Because somebody can say, I have this much money and I want to retire at this age and this, but in the back of the advisor's mind, they have to be thinking, this person sounds nervous. We need to talk about what actually they're thinking, because what it sounds like they're saying is, I don't think I'm going to be in the position that I want to be in. And if that's the case, then we need to figure out what the position is, how to get them there, and then I can put their mind at ease, and then have clients that are like that. So I think the number one thing that I was disappointed about with that measure passing was with that measure not passing, was that you could finally have the industry looked at as the fiduciary, to have the fiduciary responsibility that it always should have had. You don't want to have the Wolf of Wall Street forever. You want to actually transition into somebody who's caring about your family and your needs. And, they're going to have other clients, but you're a concern to them, as opposed to, here's a stock.
And I think there's actually a larger underlying issue even than just that, because I agree. I think the people that are fighting change fall into two categories. One is, maybe you're doing something that is you're not going to be able to do anymore, that that you benefit from, and you really don't want to be called out on that. And you need to just go away if that's the case. But the second one is, I definitely think that there is a form of, for lack of a better term, laziness among people that are really successful. I told you I like data, and I mean, the data suggests that the more successful you are, the less likely you are to change what you're doing, even if you know that it's a positive thing and it's in your best interest. I mean, I work in an industry of finance. I can't ever say guarantee for anything.
Right.
But one thing I can guarantee is that our industry will change. And you have to be prepared for that. You have to be willing to take that next step, or else we're going to be 50% fewer advisors instead of 30 at some point for this next change, because people are just going to say, forget it. It's going to take way too much time and effort. I'm already 60. I wasn't going to retire for 10 years, but I'm just going to stop, because I don't have the energy, to keep up with where the industry is going. And I mean, I kind of see the Department of Labor piece that we were discussing is almost a warning sign to what our industry may or may not be in the future.
Changes are coming. We just didn't get it done now.
It will happen at some point. And whether it's this or it's something different, our industry is not going to look the same in 10 years as it does now, and no industry will.
Right.
Because, that's the beauty of progress and technology and just what people want. I mean, you even look at, the food industry 20 years ago. I mean, no one cared where their food came from, and that's a huge piece now, and it's a whole industry in itself. And if you weren't able to keep up with that, if you're in the grocery business or whatever, you're out of business now. It's the same with our industry, where you're going to have to be able to roll with changes and anticipate those, and be willing to do them, or else you might as well just find something else to do.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw, and I won't name names or even name the place that we were at when this occurred, but when we were in a sales meeting, and somebody, they always had the figures, like who's top of the line, who's the number one person, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, well, that's great. Next kind of thing. But the one thing that drove me nuts was when I saw people that were just, the whole year, nothing. We saw them in the office, like, once, twice a week. And I'm not talking about the older advisors who would like kind of have their clients, they'd see 3 or 4 clients a day, and then they leave at 3 o'clock. That's fine. They've been in the industry for 50 years. They've paid their dues, and now they're not coasting, but they're actually taking care of their clients. That doesn't bother me at all because that's just the structure of your business. It's like an attorney who takes on, a few clients every now and then, when they're in their 70s. It's like you have a huge store of knowledge. You just don't need to work the way that you worked when you were, 30. But the ones that drove me nuts were the guys that they had several million under management, and they got paid their fees based on that. But the company would hold those back unless they had a certain amount of volume, and that volume would come from them, either churning insurance policies or whatever it might be, and that's how they hit every single year. And I just remember sitting there thinking, not that I mind, somebody, coming in late, like, working a little bit at a time and, barely hitting their numbers and getting all those fees. What bothered me was, what are you doing to your client? Like, if it's helping them, fantastic. Like, if you're saving them money on their insurance and every single year that that's the case, okay, you can make the argument that that's fine. But what I'm seeing is a guy that's collecting money from their client for not really doing anything outside of churning insurance policies. And that drove me kind of nuts. And that's when I think you and I had kind of had our initial discussions about, what about this fee-based system? What about this, you earn 1.5% to 2% or whatever it was on the portfolio. And that way, if the client gains, fantastic. If they lose, that's not good for you either. So you're automatically tied to them, not only in responsibility, because you should be, but in, your value to them is either, positive or negative. And I guess that statement should come with the, little asterisk that says you're not ever going to be able to really do much about that outside of, the proper procedures with regard to like allocating assets and that kind of thing, keeping it either conservative or, maybe it's a little bit more out there, but you are tied to them and they should expect a higher level of service for you rather than just knowing that you're holding their assets. And with some of those guys, I doubt their clients even knew who they were at that time. And that is, I think, a really important piece of why things like, that measure should really be considered in the future, because you don't want an advisor getting paid for work that they're not doing.
No, and I think it all comes down to, what value am I actually providing?
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't want to meet with somebody unless I'm going to provide some sort of value. And that value better be more than just, here's what has happened over the last 6 months.
6 decades.
Here's what your return is.
Yeah.
Because they can get that from opening their statement.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be more valuable than that, and that value may fall outside the traditional realms of what you would normally do in your meeting. But as long as something is valuable, because if it's not, what is it? It's just a waste of that person's time.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a good. that's not a good way for keeping people around.
Yeah.
That does not tend to make people very sticky to what you do.
No.
If what you do is seen as not valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. And I mean, the thing is I really can't control what anyone else does. I can only control what I do. And I just have to assume that me being a good steward, not only of their money, but of their time when I see them, it can come back to benefit both of us in the end.
Yeah.
And it may be, hey, this is what the professional I use does. What does yours do? Oh, he hasn't. I don't even know who he is.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should leave.
Yeah. Well, I know in that system, a lot of times if an advisor would drop off, the individual accounts would just kind of go to somewhere else, like whether it was, their manager or, just kind of into the system. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have at some point too, is when you have a situation like that and you have those older advisors that eventually will, either sell their practice or their business will drop off. I mean, how many accounts that were like that, where the person had left the industry and, we would see their accounts, we'd try to contact them, they would have no idea. And so you tried to build a relationship with them, but they had come to expect a level of service from the industry that was unfortunate. And so it's like, we can't afford to look at that and say, this should be the level of expectation. It should absolutely be when that person calls, it's like, hey, I had a great advisor. Now it's your turn. Let's continue this.
Well, and I mean, you and I would even find that with fairly large sums of money.
Yeah.
People that, people might have $100,000 saved, which that's certainly more than I would like to just lose.
Right.
that would have no idea what was going on with it, who was managing it, really even what the company was. And I don't know. That's an issue I think that needs to be solved. But once again, I mean, I can do what I can do on my end, and just sort of I don't know. Maybe I just hope that other people are doing that. I really don't. I would be, if a larger percentage of the population was served and served well, I'd be okay if I didn't grow anymore. It's kind of like I was listening to an interview with Elon Musk, and he said that they. And I didn't think this after seeing him, but I was like, okay, well, maybe I can relate. And he said that all of their designs and everything for Tesla vehicles are not patented. If we can essentially change the world into being all electric, fantastic. If I don't make any more money, and at times I sort of feel like that. That I wish that there was a larger mentality of service.
Yeah.
Most specifically with my industry, but probably across the board.
Well, I think that's the positive and negative of automation, right? Like you get maybe a quicker response time, but you don't necessarily get the answer that you need immediately.
Yeah.
What's a situation that you've seen more often than not that people will come into you and they'll just have regular issues like we've talked about this entire time, like retirement, paying for their kids, that kind of thing, but what's something that you've caught several times now that maybe nobody expects, that anybody that's, even if they're, listening and they've got their investments with Charles Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard, like what's one of those things that it's like, hey, you really should watch out for this and confirm that, like, is it trust, like once something happens to them? Is it how they pass it to their kids? Is it spousal? I mean, I think I had a lesson when I was in college, and it was our estate planning class. And it was like why you should always check up on who your TOD is, who your beneficiaries are. And the story was that there was this very, very wealthy guy, and he got married, and he had a prenup, but he had been married to his spouse long enough to where he eventually signed things over to her. Well, fast forward, they've been married for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And first 5 were great, got along. He put her as beneficiary to everything. Last 5, not so much, and he eventually divorced her. Well, so he never changes his beneficiaries. So even though there was a prenup there, he'd already said after the fact, like, nope, it's hers. So before anything happens, like a year or 2 later, he has a new girlfriend. Everything's going great. He ends up just dropping of a heart attack. Girlfriend goes in and is like, we're good. He must have left something for me. And the ex-wife realizes that he dies and checks in. Every single thing that he owned went to her. Nobody else. They weren't married, so I'm sure there were some really fun tax implications for that.
Yeah.
But it's like the way that the divorce was, he would have never wanted that to happen, and it was just like all of a sudden, she became an absolute millionaire because he didn't think properly. He didn't just check up on his finances. And that's a really kind of ridiculous argument or a ridiculous story to have. But is there anything where you see somebody come in and just say, like, we really need to check this and confirm this once we've got everything else set up?
I don't know that it is ridiculous. I would say 60% of the time when people come in, they either have the wrong beneficiary or they have no beneficiary.
Yeah.
Which can be really costly. So just kind of for informational purposes only, if you do not have...
That was nice, by the way. For informational purposes only.
I wasn't even thinking of that. But that is, I guess I'm back into financial advisor speak. If you have your trust listed incorrectly on a beneficiary, or if you do not have, if you've gone to the expense of having legal work done and it's not listed as a beneficiary on your account, meaning what will happen to your money when you die. A lot of people think, well, I had a will done, I had a trust done or whatever, but if it's not listed, then no one cares. Essentially how everything is laid out on your accounts, that is absolutely what will happen. And you can come to the court all day long and say, but look, they had this document done, and they say, well, apparently it doesn't pertain to this. So I see that happen a significant amount of times. I also see, it seems like the more money someone makes and the more money they have, the less likely they are to have actually had some legal work done.
Really?
Yeah. I've had clients that have had, in the tens of millions of dollars worth of liquid assets, money, a lot of it's in cash. And at the time, essentially, that would go well over what you could pass to someone if you were to die and not have them have a huge estate tax bill.
Yeah.
Have nothing in place about it. I work with a lot of attorneys, and a lot of attorneys do not have this done because they're busy. They're busy taking care of their clients. It's kind of like the doctor that smokes. That happens more often than not.
What is it? The cobbler's children have no shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly that happens more often than not. And it's not because of any ill intent on they're just working.
Yeah.
And pretty soon they've amassed this huge amount of money and don't even really realize how sometimes.
Yeah.
Becomes incredibly real to them. And it's really not planned for at all. As far as someone coming in with investments being off, that really doesn't happen that often. What I see more often than not is I will have someone's father or mother pass away, and the old advisor of their father or mother is trying to hang on to those assets, let me continue to manage these. And you will look and realize that while the breakdown of, stocks versus bonds looks just fine, it's incredibly aggressive for their age. So they've just really not paid attention over the years.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you on that, but I think it's an important point. Explain how the stocks and bonds can look just fine on paper when you see like a stock and bond portfolio, but can actually be very aggressive or very conservative and might not align properly with what you're looking for.
Sure. So kind of the thought process behind investing, sort of the investing 101, if you will, is when you're younger, you start with more stocks than bonds, and as you get to be older and you have less time for, let me back up a little bit, because I think sometimes this gets explained incorrectly. I think people tend to have this perception that stocks are risky, bonds are safe, and that's not really true. I mean, all investment comes with some sort of risk. Bonds have risk as well. It's just different than stocks. Stocks do tend to fluctuate up and down in price more frequently than bonds do. So the reason why you and also, I guess, when stocks go up, bonds tend to go down, and bonds tend to go up, stocks tend to go. They have a directly inverse relationship to one another. So that's why you hold both at the same time. Your hope is that when the stock market is up, you're able to take advantage of owning a lot of stocks. But if the stock market starts to drop down, you have bonds there to sort of pad the decline a bit. Okay, so to your question, the idea behind this is, as you're younger, you tend to hold more stocks than bonds because the theory is you're younger. You're probably going to work for a lot more years. You have time if your portfolio or your account tends to go down a little bit to make that up later. And as you get older, you back off how risky that is, or you add more bonds to the mix. So whereas when you're young, you may have 80% of your holdings, and I'm just using this as an example.
Yeah, for informational purposes
for
only.
informational purposes only. 80% of what you own may be in stocks and 20% may be in bonds, and that obviously adds up to 100%. As you get older, that might change.
Carry the one.
Just want to make sure that everybody can do the math here. As you get older, that may drop to maybe a 60% stocks, 40% bonds, and then as you go into retirement, it may be something along the lines of 50% and 50%. And on paper, you may look at someone's statement and you may see that they own 7 or 8 different mutual funds, and on paper that doesn't really mean anything. And then you start to look at what percentage they own of stock mutual funds versus bond mutual funds, and it may be way off. They may be an incredibly conservative individual that was 85 years old, in retirement, taking income from their account, and they're invested like someone that's 30.
Yeah.
That to me signals that the advisor's either not paying attention or they're doing everything they can to get as much money off of that account, because we obviously make more as the account grows. It's worth more.
Well, there's a big difference between investing in the Fortune 100 and a stock and a high yield bond, mean, the high yield bond
Sure.
is going to go right along with kind of the stock market a heck of a lot more than a AAA top quality bond portfolio is. So to me, that was the example I always gave. Like if you're invested in GE or the bond of a C-rated company, GE is probably going to be stable. Like again, for informational purposes, I'm not tied to that anymore. I can say it.
You could probably get in more trouble than I
Yeah,
would.
more than likely. Are you giving advice? I'm not giving anybody advice for informational purposes only. But in theory, a big, strong company like a GE isn't going to move quite as much as maybe that C-level bond is going to rise and fall because it's a lot more risky, but even though it's a bond. So you can be in a good bond portfolio, but it still might be risky if you're investing in the wrong bonds.
And I think it comes down to what percent of that risky investment you own overall, because you can be an older individual and be more conservative and still own what you're describing in that C-level bond, but maybe you own
5%.
2% of your overall portfolio versus 65.
Right.
If you own the 65, somebody's not paying attention, most likely, in my mind. I guess you asked about, I guess the area where I have had people come in sort of fresh off the street and we're analyzing things. Sometimes you can look at somebody's portfolio breakdown. There really seems to be no rhyme or reason for what percentage of each investment they own. And what that usually tells me is, once again, somebody's just not paying attention. You need to make adjustments throughout the year, in my opinion, to sort of stay on a particular plan that you're trying to hit.
Yeah. And the example would be, I assume, something like you're in a 60-40 portfolio, stocks versus bonds, and then the stock market just takes off, so now you're 80-20.
Exactly.
So you need to
readjust them.
Yeah, you need to reallocate those things, put it back into a normal situation so that you can take advantage of that growth, but you also stay in the risk area that you need to be in. Yeah.
I do have people come in a lot that I'll say, well, this is a relatively aggressive portfolio, and they'll say, oh, it is? I didn't realize. And
well, of course, that's not their expertise.
well, and I kind of think that shows that someone is just not providing the level of oversight maybe they should be.
Yeah.
But probably the things that stand out more often than not are, I mean, you talked about the beneficiary example, and I think that's a very true statement, and it gets used a lot. I know HR people say that a lot to new employees. They'll say, make sure that this gets changed and make sure you take your ex-spouses off. And, I've heard a story where an ex-spouse didn't get taken off and they got paid. And people think, well, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
And I would say that an ex-spouse is left on a beneficiary on account at least 3 times a year.
Have you ever found one where they've remarried? Because that would be an interesting story.
Yeah, I haven't had. Luckily, I haven't had anybody die yet, and have it not go to where it's supposed to.
Yeah.
But I've definitely had periods of time where it could have.
Yeah. I think that would be a fun, not fun for anybody but the fly on the wall, but just a fun conversation to see when the new spouse has the old spouse listed and the new spouse finds out about that in a meeting.
Oh, I did. So I did have a very interesting meeting at one point, and this is not the same thing, but I did have. I had a married couple that had a prenuptial agreement, and the husband always knew that the wife's family had a lot of money, but didn't really know what that meant. We were going through the financial planning process, and essentially what happens is if she dies, it skips him and goes to her brother if he's still alive, and to the kids.
Yep.
And they were over 18. And he always thought, he was like, married for love kind of thing. Didn't really know what I'm missing out on until we're doing a financial planning meeting and we're actually taking down real numbers as to what the wife's estate will be worth if she's alive. And I can tell by the look in his face that he has no idea. And that was a very uncomfortable room to be in at that moment. However, I mean, you have to know that information.
Yeah.
And they've actually been able to move past it, and they actually probably have a stronger relationship now, because I think it actually bothered him more than he realized that he didn't know, that piece of the story. So that was a fun day. There are times where you just want to be somewhere else, and you've basically made the situation happen.
Yeah, it's like when Michael Scott makes people bring in paper in the room so that he can get out of meetings. I think he actually says, like, no, I'm not going to take the phone call. I'd probably be the opposite. Like, bring me in the paper.
Didn't know we were having office references today.
I love it, man. man. There was a marathon on the other weekend. I was just excited as could be.
Nice.
Yeah. Well,
I had to work.
oh, that sucks. Yeah, there was a John Harbaugh, the Baltimore Ravens coach, made a Michael Scott reference later in the season that I thought was awesome. It was the I'm not superstitious, I'm just a little stitious.
That's funny.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. We're at 90 minutes.
Is that, man, it flew by.
I know.
This was fun, so I appreciate the time.
Absolutely. We'll come on again, definitely. I'm sure as the 2020 election nears, there's going to be some fun conversation to be had. Try not to get too political. I ran for office as a libertarian, and I got curb stomped. But definitely have you on, because the market always, especially in that first trial, to see if you can get to the next term, it always seems a little weird. And with the guy that we have in office, I don't know really what's going on day to day, whether you love him or hate him. Sometimes it just feels like things are really wonky, and especially with the Democratic House, it's going to be an interesting year and a half or 2 years. So definitely appreciate if you can come on again and just kind of like walk people through like what the hell's going on.
I'd love to. The market hates uncertainty, and there's been an awful lot of that. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, man, thanks so much for coming on. Yeah. How do people get a hold of you?
So I can be reached through our office number, which is 913-563-7300. You'll get to talk to Sammy when you call in. She's fantastic. And I'd love to speak to anybody. And you know what? Even if it's just, I've been doing this for a long time, and I love my current situation, but I'd love an outside perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm always happy to give that, and I may be able to prove to you that what you're doing is exactly what you should be doing.
Yeah, well, that's good to know too.
Yeah.
It's like, you're in good shape. Still coming to me though.
Yeah, that's right.
I assume because of the rules and regulations, you're not on like a Twitter account for your financial profile. Talking good knowledge.
No, so we do have a Facebook page.
Okay.
We're at Infinitas KC.
Okay.
And we do have a company Twitter page that I would love to tell you that I'm the mastermind behind, but I am not.
Gotcha.
We have a fantastic person in the office named Elise that is really, really good at what she does, and making us look good. And then I have a Facebook page that is my private Facebook page that is not very well because I'm not Elise. It's not kept up with very well.
Fair enough.
I'm too busy outside serving people, but on our website's Infinitas KC if you want to read my very non-traditional bio.
Yeah, I have your bio pulled up.
My bio is not written traditionally. It is not written in third person.
It isn't at all. And I just the first line, because the whole bio is great. It definitely gives you a good view of you. But I just love the fact that you started off with, I'm an only child, grew up in a neighborhood with other children my age. Unfortunately, I have no exciting stories of being a ruffian or a daredevil. Like, yep.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with a bio, what do you want people to do? You want them to read it.
Yeah.
I wanted people to, get a good taste of what they're going to get into if they meet me. And I think that's kind of my personality. It's serious, but it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Mm-hmm. But my goal was, whether you like me or hate me, I just want you to read. I want you to read the whole thing.
Yeah. And
it's long.
Yeah.
But I found that people at least read the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it's a good story. I mean, you've got, right after that little intro, you talk about a fire that may or may not have been caused by somebody in the neighborhood named Brian Watts.
I say that it was what's the exact term? It's over exaggerated or whatever.
Yeah, it's right after. It's the stories of the neighborhood's garage being set on fire are highly exaggerated.
Yeah, I think the point is I was an incredibly boring child. I did grow up in a neighborhood where I was the only kid. There was no one else my age. And then I think next it's flash forward to when I feel I became more interesting. That's true. That's when I feel like I became more interesting as an adult.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing when I'm talking about like stories growing up, and it's like, let me tell you a story about my brother because he's awesome and he has these great stories, and nope, I don't really have anything. Do you want to talk? I assume you don't want to talk about choir. I assume you don't want. You might want to talk about baseball. I talked with baseball on the first episode of the podcast.
Yeah.
So that was good. And then you probably, unless you're a theater person, you might not want to talk about theater, especially like high school and college theater. It's not on most people's love.
Yeah, we just, as an office, did a trivia night down at the Boulevard Brewery, and one of the categories was musical theater, and everybody just looked at me and said,
Yep.
You've got to save us in this realm because none of us know anything about it. So I knew I would have enjoyed that conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so not the greatest representative of musical theater because I absolutely loved when I was involved in it, but I was also ridiculous. Like when we struck the set, my directors would always make fun of me because like, do you do anything? It's like I carry stuff. Like the guy, which is weird now because I'm handy now, but like at the time, like I grew up, my dad was a floor installer. I go into musical theater. I got, a scholarship to go to college.
I can't even imagine that conversation with your dad that installs tile and floors. Dad, I want to go into musical theater.
He loved it.
Oh, okay.
He was awesome.
That's
yeah, no,
good.
he was a huge, like when I forgot my first role when I was in high school, I tried out for Guys and Dolls and I got the role of Sky Masterson. Mm-hmm. The night before, he and I went out to dinner. And my mom was out of town, and he was just like, "You're gonna get it." It's like, "What do you mean?" It's like, "I know you're gonna get it." And I got to school, and I got it. And he was like, "You don't have to tell me. I know." But he was. I mean, they were at every show. It was awesome. But yeah, it was definitely a little strange when you're sitting there, like everybody striking the set, and you're just like, "So, that's a saw." They're like, "That's a hammer, dummy." Like, "Oh yeah, I remember that from working with my dad." I wasn't that bad, but it was just like, I'm not. I'll carry stuff when you tell me to carry stuff, but outside of that, no.
You're like, I'm talent.
Exactly, I'm the talent, which I'm sure just endeared me to everybody. Yeah.
Oh, I'm reliving your life now because my son does musical theater a lot.
Yeah.
And I tend to work behind the scenes. I tend to move sets around during the show. The guy's all dressed in black, so you can't see me when I'm back there with the headsets on and everything. And then afterwards, we will strike, and the talent just looks at you like, I put in the work. I was on stage for 2.5 hours. What do you mean I have to tear this down? So I get it.
Yeah, it was always interesting. Like I think high school, college, everybody made fun of me for that, and of course then like a few years later, I'm flipping houses and laying tile and doing all that kind of stuff. It's like I actually told my director that I was flipping houses, one of them, and he started like belly laughing. He was like, "Don't let me into any of those houses." Like I have other people that do some things, but I'm good. I know what I'm doing.
Did the inspector actually
exactly
prove this?
Yes, he did. He said it was the best he'd ever seen. Deal with it.
No, you do great work.
No, but it was just kind of ridiculous. When you're getting laughed at for that kind of thing, it's like, I probably need to like pick up a hammer and actually try.
Yeah. What are you gonna do?
Go drink afterwards with the rest of the group.
Nice.
Well, hey man, thanks again for coming on. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. I appreciate the time.
Absolutely.